The French Revolution had its martyrs, sure, but it also had twice as many morons. From a king who tried stealth in a rolling chandelier to a foreign duke who thought a threat letter would calm a riot. Here are some of the biggest idiots of the French Revolution. For our first pebble-brained planner, roll it back to 1791. It was a time of bread riots, pamphlets, and very loud clubs. And sitting near the top of it all was Louis XVI, a decent locksmith and an indecent strategist. His big idea was simple: slip out of Paris, reach loyal troops on the frontier, and restart the game from a safer map. In theory, fine. But in practice, he picked the largest, slowest, most recognizable coach in Europe and rattled through every village like a parade float, and people compared his face to the coins in their pockets and, surprise, recognized him. At Varennes, a sharp-eyed postmaster ended the heist. The stealth escape turned into state evidence. Trust in the crown evaporated. And by the time Louis made his way back to Paris, the question wasn't reform, it was whether the man kept his head. Turns out you can't sneak out of a house that's on fire in a wagon full of fireworks. And the fallout was instant. Moderates who begged for a constitutional monarchy got whiplash trying to defend a king caught mid-road trip in royal cosplay. Pamphleteers had a field day. Parisians, who already suspected the court of double dealing, now had a souvenir program. It wasn't just a failed escape, it was proof of intent. You don't accidentally flee the capital with spare passports and a carriage loaded like a wedding cake. We've all seen them and we all resent them. Since the dawn of foreign policy, the swaggering outsider has tried to yell a revolution into submission. In modern terminology, we refer to this special breed as the open-mouthed deterrent. Which brings us to the Duke of Brunswick. In 1792, he issued the Brunswick Manifesto, a helpful note promising that if Parisians touched the royal family, his armies would burn their city and punish everyone. He thought this would scare people straight. It did quite the opposite. This fused the factions like molten iron. Within days, the Tuileries fell, the monarchy collapsed, and Paris went from reform to regime change at sprint speed. If your plan is threaten the crowd, make sure the crowd doesn't have cannons. And here's the kicker. Even people who still like the king hated the idea of foreign boots deciding French politics. The manifesto turned street fear into street purpose. Suddenly, hesitation looked like treason. Compromise smelled like betrayal. Nothing radicalizes like a deadline stamped with an enemy's crest. Before controversy permanently clouded their legacy, the Girondins had been the polished salesmen of big talk. But in 1792, they decided that France's bankruptcy, breadlines, and mutinous officers could be solved by a quick little war against Austria, Prussia, and basically whomever else blinked. Victory by manifesto. The army? Half the generals were royalists, the troops were unpaid and untrained, and the officer corps had either emigrated or learned the hard way where the scaffold stood. War didn't unite the country, it radicalized it. Defeats bred paranoia, paranoia bred purges, and purges bred the terror. The Girondins wanted glory and wound up feeding the machine that ate them. You can't export a revolution when your quartermaster is a ghost. Let's picture the front. New volunteers with new flags, new songs, and no boots that fit. Officers shuffled like a deck of cards, logistics scribbled in ideals, not inventory. Every loss at the border became a whisper in Paris. Traitor, plot, purge. The cannon at the front boomed, the guillotine in the city answered. There are a lot of ways to wreck an economy, but few manage it with the upbeat confidence of a committee holding a printing press. Enter the assignat paper backed by confiscated church lands. In theory, it transformed dirt into money. In practice, it transformed markets into smoke. Prices roared, breadlines stretched, shopkeepers vanished. Hoarders got blamed, then jailed, then guillotined, while the presses kept singing. By the time people realized flour had become the real national currency, there weren't enough bayonets to protect it. Inflation isn't a policy, it's a confession. And because the streets still had to eat, lawmakers tried price ceilings. Great slogan, but terrible signal. Farmers held back grain, and smugglers thrived. The market didn't stabilize, it went underground. When your money buys less by lunch than it did at breakfast, you don't need a pamphlet to know something broke. We've all met the reformer who can't stop at fixing the pipes and decides to remodel the sky. The de-Christianizers decided to reboot society by trashing churches, renaming months, and inventing a 10-day week that made peasants hate Mondays even more. Result, the countryside didn't see reason, it saw a war on their mothers' graves. Vendée rose with pitchforks and prayer books, and the Republic answered with scorched earth. If your enlightenment makes bread harder to buy and funerals illegal, congratulations, you just armed the people who grow your food. And culture isn't a toggle switch. You can pass a decree against saints, but you can't legislate grandma. People will pray in kitchens, in barns, in fields, and suddenly your rational calendar looks like a bad joke printed on a ration card. Some men are warned by history. Others write new chapters with their friends' blood. Maximilien Robespierre began as the careful voice against war, against corruption, and against death penalties. Then came the law of 22 Prairial, trial as rumor, defense as decoration, execution as policy. The tribunal sped up like a factory line. Enemies multiplied, then vanished, and allies noticed that proximity to Maximilian was a health risk. The Festival of the Supreme Being sealed the vibe. Sky blue coat, moral theater, a whiff of divinity without the paperwork. The man who hated kings started to look like a priest king. In July, deputies chose survival. Votes flew, arrests followed, and Robespierre met his own law with the efficiency he demanded of everyone else. Purity is not a strategy, it's a countdown. And here's the part the textbooks rush. The terror wasn't just ideology, it was also momentum. Once the blade becomes the answer, every question gets asked with a drumroll. It takes courage to say stop. It takes numbers to say you're done. Thermidor was both. There are a lot of ways to lose a city, but few manage it by scheduling their uprising on a general's calendar. In 1795, Paris royalists gathered to shove the new Directory. The Directory handed the problem to an artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte, who introduced the boulevard to a whiff of grape shot. The crowd dissolved, the career launched. The moral is straightforward. If you challenge a government staffed by gunners, don't line up in tidy streets and wait politely. They wanted bourbons, they got an emperor in training. What do you think when you hear Directory? If this very utterance makes you imagine 5 bosses, 0 plan, and a budget balanced by looting other people, you're pretty close. The directors rigged elections, muzzled opponents, and paid their bills by invading neighbors and calling it liberation. When cash ran short, they printed paper. When riots flared, they called the army. And when the army got tired of saving them, it called Napoleon. They didn't govern the revolution, they rented time from a general with interest due in crowns. Daily life under the Directory. Speculators with quick hands, uniforms with unpaid buttons, and cabinet meetings that sounded like auctions. Elections were adjusted. Opposition papers were relocated, and the Constitution had footnotes upon footnotes, all of them being labeled unless inconvenienced. Abroad, the crowned heads formed clubs with impressive names and terrible assumption. They looked at France and saw a contagious rash that would clear up with a few marches and a stern letter. What they got was mass conscription, patriotic lunacy, and commanders who learned by doing. They predicted a sprint and got years. They also predicted one siege and met a nation with arms. Every misread in Vienna and Berlin pumped air into the very fire they were trying to smother. And then there were the chorus lines. The bankers who stashed coins and waited it out. The journalists who sold optimism by the column inch. the moderates who promised it would blow over, and the zealots who promised one more purge would fix everything. Nobody had a real plan that didn't involve time miraculously solving time bombs. Time didn't solve it, Napoleon did. There are a lot of ways to lose a revolution. You can flee in a gilded bus. You can threaten a city into bravery. You can declare a crusade while your soldiers need shoes. You can print money until bread costs a republic. You can purify the state until it purifies you. Or you can run a 5-man government like a raffle and act shocked when the artillery captain takes the prize. In the end, the French Revolution didn't just fall to its enemies, it quite literally tripped over its idiots. Which disaster should we roast next? The biggest idiots of World War I, the biggest idiots of the Roman Empire, or the biggest idiots of the Crusades? This is Wacky History. Wild, weird, and wonderfully wacky. New episodes every week. Be sure to like and subscribe.